So the reason I'm doing this talk, I've been doing some workshops inside of Mozilla with the community around influencing and delegating, because people keep saying that this is something that they really struggle with in their projects. So this is normally an hour workshop, and I just pushed it down to 25 talk. More important and keep it interactive, so I'll be asking you guys some questions. So why delegate? There's multiple reasons. Really, in the core of it, it's beneficial to you and it's beneficial to the project. By delegating, by giving more tasks out, you involve more people and you grow your community. The essence of delegating really is getting more people involved. Right? And when we say delegating, someone asked me a question in the workshop recently. What's the difference between delegating and asking for help? And I think really at the core of it, it's pretty much the same. When you're delegating, you're asking people for help. You're handing off some responsibility, you're giving more tasks out to more people. But it's really somewhat different and somewhat the same. If you're just asking for help with your current tasks, you're not handing off that responsibility. Right? And really growing your community, getting more people involved. That's the core of good delegation. Prevent burnout. So I think this is the most important thing that people want to learn about delegating is you have too much on your plate, you have too much going on. So how many people here really struggle to get everything that they've committed to done? Yeah, it's really, really common. And the root of this really is usually because you care. Right? You care about what you're doing, you take on more and more responsibility, it's something you feel really passionately about. Unfortunately, a lot of that sense of responsibility and that sense of passion makes us hold on to things too tightly. Because we want to make sure that they're done, we want to make sure that they're done well. Right? It's important. You're doing it because it's important. Another really good reason to delegate is helping develop skills in other people. This is also, and I'm going to talk about why it's hard to delegate. This is another reason it's really hard for a lot of people, right? Like by handing off tasks, you're letting other people learn how to do things. And the learning's a little bit scary, right? Like if I know how to do something, presumably I'm an expert. If I'm letting other people learn to also become an expert, that sort of implies that they aren't necessarily starting to be an expert, or at least I don't consider them. So there's a lot of training and developing that goes on in delegating. And usually the answer to this is, well, I don't have a lot of time for that. I think the question is, do you have time to do all the things you want to do? Usually the answer is no. Delegating also builds a stronger team. When you are committed to do everything yourself, you're not really working in a team. And so by everyone giving tasks to other people or giving projects to other people, you're really growing the team, you're building that collaboration, getting everything stronger. And you really empower people, right? And we all know that the more empowered you feel, the more creative, the more inspired, the more motivated, the more involved you are. So the more you can delegate, the more you're building a really strong, vital, creative community. Right? And the core of why we're all here, a piece of it is open source, but a lot of it is the community that comes from open source. And so sharing the work, sharing responsibility, and keeping everybody really motivated and excited, that's a key thing. I think we've all worked on teams where one person kind of holds on to everything, and occasionally sort of hands out a few things that they can't quite manage or don't want to do, and it's incredibly demotivating. Right? Where think about teams or groups or communities you've been involved in where you are able to take more and more responsibility and people mentor you and coach you as you're building your skills, and how much better that is as a participant or as a leader. Why is it hard to delegate? This is why you're all here, right? How many of you have said this at some point or another when you're trying to solve a problem. Yeah, everybody. This is probably the most difficult thing to overcome when you're trying to figure out how to delegate and do it well. Right? It's really hard. You know what you're doing. You know how to do it. You know you're going to do it right. Next question. How many of you guys have actually been able to, try to delegate, right? And found out that the other person can actually do it better or faster? It's probably about the same number. This is something I have always struggled with. It's taken years and years and years of practice for me to learn to sort of let go and realize that if I'm committed to too many things, I'm doing a lot of things really poorly. And that it does actually, the work is better and faster when I am committed to doing the things that I really need to do, and have other people also doing things. It's sort of a pretty simple equation, but it's a hard one to get to because it's really hard to let go of that control. So if you hear yourself saying, I can do it better and faster, think about how many times and how many projects you're actually thinking that, and realize that if you're trying to do 10 things, you're not doing all of them better, and you're not doing all of them faster. And so, like I said, I struggle with this because I have an inherent inability to say no. And I like to do things, and so I always feel like, I could totally do this. I'm good at it, but I'm not really good at doing 10 things, as much as I like to pretend I can multitask. I can't count on anyone else to handle this. This is kind of a twin to that other piece, right? I don't really know this person. I haven't worked with this person. I don't really trust them. Are you really sure? I'm not sure that they are going to have the time, the commitment. What if they run out in the middle? I'm going to have to redo it. There's a lot of trust building that goes on when you're trying to delegate. The key to things like this is thinking about mentoring and coaching, getting to know people, really starting small, and really learning what people are capable of, and knowing your own strengths as well. I suck at communicating. I'm really bad at it. I don't like to write reports. I'm terrible at it, right? Not only, I can maybe count on other people to do it, but I can absolutely count on myself not to do it, because I really don't like it. It's the last thing I like to do. And tied to that, it's too important to risk somebody else screwing it up. I hear this all the time, invariably when I'm doing a workshop. People say, but what if it's really important? And the question is, is it really important that you're the person who does it? Right? And maybe the answer is yes. And maybe that one thing that's so important is the one thing you shouldn't delegate. And you should think about other things that are. But I usually challenge people to think whatever you think is so important. So some of them were partner negotiations, right? Okay, if that's the most important thing that absolutely can't be screwed up, are you the best person to do it? Do you actually have those skills? Maybe someone in your community actually works for the government and knows how to do those kind of negotiations, or works at a company that's very similar to the partner or has those skills. So it's really a question, some cases, yeah, you may be the only person who really has the skills to do that. But I think it's always good to challenge and say, well, if it's too important, is it so important that I shouldn't risk myself doing it? I'm not the best person to do it, and I can't actually focus. I don't have time. Actually, I could probably just leave this I don't have time to deal with delegating. I don't have time to manage someone else or try to manage someone else, or even just time to train. Okay? How many times has this happened to other people also? Yeah. I mean, the reason you're delegating is you don't have time, but you don't have time to go through the whole process of delegating, right? That's the the paradox of trying to delegate. Think of it as a small investment that you're making up front. Right? So if you're able to teach someone or delegate, you're investing in your time later. Right? So up front, you may lose some time because you're building skills in someone else, you're getting them ready, you're helping them take on something new. But once they've taken it on, your time is now free. Right? You may be helping mentor them, you may be helping check the work, which are no longer investing. So it's really thinking, like, when you think about this barrier, take the long view. Right? Up front, it may take a little bit more, but long term, you're saving yourself a lot of time. How can you overcome these barriers? This is, actually, I usually have a slide here that says, get over yourself. But it feels a little harsh. But it's actually true, right? Like, it's really easy to think you're the only person who can do things or, you know, want to have that control, but really, like, get over yourself. Like, the more you let go, the more you get back. And that's really, really true when you start thinking about how many times you've involved more people and how well that you can have those relationships and build relationships. And don't be afraid to give up control. Again, I think it's the hardest thing. Like, it's incredibly different. Be a leader and a coach. So thinking about delegating, you're really, in a sense, going from being the person doing the work to the person helping other people do the work. Right? This is a really good skill to learn. Right? You're moving, you're from just, from part of being your community, it's really helpful. For your career, it's really helpful. Just for sort of work, like life balance, it's a really helpful thing to learn how to do. Building skills in others is also incredibly rewarding, both for you and for them. And showing trust, mentorship, all those kind of things, it's really great. How many people here have taught other people to code? How awesome is it when you later see that person putting in a really kick-ass pull request, right? Like, it's a really good feeling, right? When you're like, hey, I totally helped this person do something awesome. Oh, and by the way, they're helping you too, which is really, really good. So delegating effectively. So this is a really, really key. I'm going to spend a lot of time over here. I wander, by the way, sorry. Delegate the results, not the process. This goes back to control and a lot of other things that I think a lot of times is really hard too. Just because someone does something in a way that you wouldn't do doesn't mean they're doing it wrong. Right? It's what comes out of the process that's actually important. This really goes back to I'm the only person who can do this right. Right usually doesn't mean results. Like when you sit and feel like what feels really uncomfortable, for most people it's not that they're not getting the right results, it's they're doing it wrong. But guess what? If someone's getting results, they're not doing it wrong. They're just doing it differently. And in fact, a lot of times they may be doing it better because they may actually have the time to be doing it where you're maybe spread way too thin, and your process may not be all that great. This one is another one that was really, really hard for me. I need to admit that I'm really process-driven. And letting go of process is really hard for me. The first time one of my project managers came in and they literally done a project plan in Word, I was like, oh God, what are you doing? But you know what? They ran that project way better than I would have, even though they were really doing it. But they had a system that really worked for them, and the results were really, really good. And so really when you're looking at how you delegate, really focus on the results. Like, what exactly is the output that you're trying to get to? Right? Like, what is the output of that project? What is the output of that task? Not how do you do the task. The worst way to delegate is to give someone a 20-page list of instructions about how to do something. And I've seen it done. I've probably done it myself before I learned better. But it's definitely, it's a temptation, right, to provide instructions. And a lot of times we're so busy providing instructions that we don't talk about the outcome. Right? Same thing, like set really clear expectations what the objectives are. So if I'm delegating a report, which I do a lot of to community, instead of giving someone a list of like, go to Google Analytics and run these 4 reports and copy the things, right? I come out and say, hey, I need a report that covers, these key metrics and, this set of new things that we've done and anything that's issues, right? That's it. That's what we need, right? Or hey, I need to figure out a couple wireframes for this thing, and here's a set of things that the wireframe needs. Not, I use Solmic, and you need to go into it and create, like, it's a slightly different, like, in the end, really, does it really matter what someone uses to build a wireframe or write a doc? In some cases, yes, and in some cases, no. But when you're working with a person who you're delegating to, be really clear about what you need from them, right? What's the end result? And then coach them how to get there if they need help. Give up the good stuff. So going back to control, right? Delegation is not handing off a bunch of crappy little tasks that you don't want to do. It's really tempting to do that. And that's the part that sucks. Like, okay, here's a question. How many of you have worked in a project and someone said, like, oh, I need to delegate some stuff to you, and you're like, okay, great, like, I would totally love to take on more responsibility. And then they're like, cool, could you, cut 400 paper snowflakes because I need to go somewhere else and I want to put some decorations on our booth. Right? Like, it sucks. It totally sucks when you're just handed a bunch of, random tasks that someone else doesn't have time for. So when you think about it, when you're delegating tasks or projects, and preferably projects, like something that's finite. Give people something that's important, right? It's really demotivating when you're handed a bunch of busy work. Like, nobody likes to do it. I don't like to do it. I certainly don't like to be handed someone else's busy work because they're too important to do it. And also, this one was another one that's really hard. Like, I've always been tempted to be like, oh, here, you guys go do this. I learned this, like, I had a vivid point of learning this. I was doing a lot of training at a previous job, and I was training a lot of our global marketing organizations to do localization for their websites, or to do the marketing websites. And so we had to travel a lot. And I realized at one point that I was delegating all the places I didn't want to go, and going to all the places that were really cool. And I had to take a step back and say, like, wow, you're kind of being an asshole. And so I would actually sit down with my team, and we'd walk through, like, okay, we need to do training in these, like, 6 cities this month. Like, who wants to do what? Because realistically, I have one guy from India, I have one guy who spoke Spanish, and I'm like, I'm going to Barcelona. And I'm like, why are you going to Barcelona? You don't speak Spanish. Right? Or the guy whose family's in India who only gets to see them once a year, I should be sending him to India to do the training. One, because he knows the culture, right? He can help do the training, he can speak the language, if that's part of India that he's from. Same thing for my Spanish speakers or someone who spoke Chinese. Like, by being able to sort of say, like, get beyond me and look at what's the best for the people in my group and my team, it's going to be the best outcome for the people who are, people using the feature, right? Like, having somebody who speaks your language makes it a better feature. So really, it's important. Like, that's a key thing for keeping people motivated, keeping people involved and growing. I've been pounding on this, but again, like, the way to really delegate well is coaching and mentoring. Don't just instruct. It can be really hard because a lot of times you want to, like, focus on that process. Like, here's how you do this task. But really, it should be, here's the task. Let me help you if you need help, right? Because people will usually ask for help if they don't know. give the credit, take the blame. Nothing worse than have something handed to you, not really knowing how to do it well, failing and being blamed. Right? Like if you're delegating, it's really important to realize you're still ultimately responsible. Like helping that person is just as much your responsibility as doing the task. And it might hurt, it might take a while. Again, like take the long view, they'll be able to keep doing that task, keep growing their skills. But if you really want your community to function really well, give the credit for the work that people have done. Take the blame when it doesn't go well, right? Like whenever I delegate, like I realize it is my responsibility to give that person all the help they need to do it well. And then another incredibly important part of delegating is feedback, right? Like giving good feedback is so important. One of the things that's really hard about feedback, be specific. There's nothing more frustrating than doing something and seems like, you did a good job. Okay, anything more? Or, you could have done that better. Like, how many people have actually gotten that feedback? Right, you could have done that better. That's it, that's like, I could have done what better? All of it better, some part of it better. So when you're giving people feedback when you delegate, really focus on the specifics, right? So for example, the report that I've delegated, feedback would be, hey, the metrics looked really great, I really liked them. I did notice, however, that you left out the section on new features that we're launching. Next time would be really great if you can add that. If you don't know where to get that information, here's where you go. Right, like that's much better than, well, you did a great job. State observations, not interpretations. That's a lot. Focus on facts. Right? It would have been great if you put this thing in the report, right? Not, I noticed you're kind of lazy and didn't finish. Right? Like, I'm interpreting someone. Like, I don't know why someone didn't have time to finish something because they've told me. Right? Don't interpret. Just facts. Don't sugarcoat. So I'm going to go against conventional knowledge. This is specifically around negative feedback. People say oh, tell someone start it off with praise and then finish it with your negative, right? That's total bullshit. It's not good. Think about it. I'm going to say the sentence hey John, you did a really great job on that report. But you probably should have, entered the key, blah, 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 right? Or it would have been, you know what you hear? Hey, John, you did a great job, end. Right? How does it, if you give feedback, if you've ever used this technique, and I know a lot of coaches actually say, you start off softly and then drop the bad stuff. Don't do that. Because people literally will hear the first part of that sentence. And as soon as you say but, and I've actually seen experiments done where they actually do some research, and people will come back and be like, what do you mean they said that I kind of done X or Y, that it wasn't perfect? They told me it was great. Right? And this is because we're programmed really to hear, one, we hear what we want to hear, and two, once you process that, oh, I did great, you're done. Which is also why the specifics of here's very specific things versus you did a great job, but you left out half of the report. No, you didn't do a great job. So again, be really specific. If you're giving negative feedback, it's good to tell people what they've done well. It's crappy to just give negative feedback. But if you're giving negative feedback or constructive feedback, give that feedback, right? But, and most important, have empathy. If you're telling people that they're not doing something right or giving them bad news, you need to internalize that. How does that feel, right? So, it's also important to come, I've gotten some pretty bad feedback in the past, right? But when a person actually cares, right, they're trying to work with me. It's hey, you didn't do this piece of the report. It'd be great if you did it next time. I'd like to help work with you so you know how to get those numbers, right? That's not negative. It's just this thing was missing, this thing didn't get done. hey, maybe I can help you with your time management skills. But like, always focus on the empathy piece. Whether you're giving good or bad feedback is really important. Questions? Yes?
So just one comment. I found that one thing I really wanted to delegate because someone else couldn't do it ended up being in the category of this is so crappy stuff I don't really want to give anyone else the experience of doing it.
So the comment was, you know, the things you want to delegate usually are the crappy things that you don't want to do. My point there is if it's crappy and you don't want to do it, no one else is going to want to do it either. Right? And so sometimes you just have to suck it up and delegating other things so you have time to do the crappy things that are also, it's not fun. It's like the fun stuff. Yeah?
How do you deal with people that say proud, say
How do you deal with people who are too proud to ask for help but end up delivering crap? I find like the mentoring piece is really, really helpful. Having managed teams like this before, a lot of times I'll sit down with people, particularly if they're struggling, right? So if they deliver something that's crap, I'll sit down with them and say, hey, I noticed there's a few things here that maybe could be done differently or better. Or I heard from other people, you know, that there was an issue here. Like, can we walk through and talk about it? You know, and then ask a lot of questions. Like, you know, usually what happens is you find out, oh yeah, I was really, really busy and I didn't get around to it, so I hacked that code out at 2 in the morning last night because I said I would do it. And it's like, wow, maybe we can help you. You know, maybe we can help you find other, you know, help other people delegate. It's usually been the way, again, sort of empathy approach. Like, I actually care. I care that you seem to be struggling. Let's figure out how we can do that. All right. Yeah, last one.
Make a mental movie.
I could, but not just randomly off the top of my head. My email is up here, or talk to me and I can email, or like post a list. I know, the first thing that came to mind is not about delegating, it's about motivation, which is not really helpful for this situation. So. Okay, well, thanks everyone.